Jack sat on the cold, hard pavement, his body aching from years of service to his country. He had once been a proud soldier, standing tall in uniform, full of pride and purpose. But that felt like a lifetime ago. The reality of his situation now was far from what he had ever imagined. Discharged from the hospital with no explanation, he was left on the streets, homeless and forgotten. He remembered the days when he had a family to come home to, a warm house filled with laughter and love. His children, full of energy and curiosity, would run to him, excited to hear about his day. He missed those days deeply. He missed the feeling of being needed. But that was all gone now. It had been years since he had seen them, and he doubted they even remembered him anymore. The pain he felt wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Jack felt invisible, as if he no longer mattered to anyone. Each day, he watched people rush past him, too busy with their own lives to even notice him sitting there. Some people would glance at him for a moment before quickly looking away, as if they were afraid to acknowledge his presence. He couldn't blame them. What did he have to offer? He wasn't the man he used to be. He was broken, inside and out. The loneliness was suffocating. It felt like a heavy weight on his chest, pressing down on him until he could barely breathe. Every night, when the world quieted down, he would lie awake, staring at the stars above, trying to remember who he used to be. Sometimes, he even thought of his old uniform, the one that had once symbolized everything he believed in. Now, it just felt like a distant dream. He could barely remember the last time anyone had shown him kindness. It had been so long since someone had stopped to ask how he was doing, or if he needed help. Most days, he simply gave up on trying to get by. He'd lost all hope that things could get better. The streets were all he had now, and it felt like they were going to swallow him whole. But still, Jack held onto a small piece of hope deep down. Even though it was barely a flicker, it was there, somewhere in the back of his mind. He clung to the belief that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Maybe there was still something left worth fighting for. But that hope was fragile, like a thread that could snap at any moment. And each day, it felt like that thread was getting thinner. Despite the overwhelming sadness and hopelessness, Jack had one thing that kept him going: his memories. They were the only thing he had left. He would close his eyes and remember the feeling of being a part of something bigger than himself. It didn't matter that the world had forgotten him. At least he had these memories, these moments of pride. He could still remember what it felt like to have a purpose. But even those memories weren't enough to fight off the despair that grew stronger with each passing day. Jack wondered if he would ever feel like himself again. Every day felt like an endless struggle for Jack. The streets had become his home, but it wasn't a place of comfort or peace. His body, once strong and proud from years of service, now felt fragile and weak. Every step was a reminder of how much he had lost. He could barely make it down the street without feeling exhausted. His limbs were stiff from the cold, and his muscles screamed for rest. But there was no place for him to rest, no place where he could feel safe. It wasn't just the physical pain that wore on him. It was the loneliness that hurt even more. Jack had never imagined that he would end up like this. He had always taken care of others, looked after his comrades, his family, his friends. But now, no one was looking after him. He felt like an outsider in the world he once knew. People walked past him every day, some with their heads held high, others lost in their thoughts, but none of them ever stopped to notice the man sitting on the pavement. At times, Jack would watch as people laughed and joked together, surrounded by their families and friends. The warmth of their lives seemed so distant to him. He thought about his own family, his children, who used to cling to his legs and run around with him in the yard. But that was all in the past now. He hadn't seen them in years, and they probably didn't even remember him. Jack sometimes wondered if they had moved on, if they had forgotten about the father they once knew. He had tried to reach out to them once, but the calls went unanswered. The letters he sent were returned unopened. It felt like a door had been slammed in his face. His heart ached as he realized that he was no longer a part of their lives. Maybe they had their reasons, maybe they had moved on, but the feeling of being forgotten crushed him every day. And yet, despite it all, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was still capable of more. He knew he wasn't just meant to be a forgotten figure on the side of the road. There had to be more to life than this endless cycle of hunger and loneliness. But the longer he spent on the streets, the harder it became to believe that. He had tried everything he could think of to get help. He had gone to shelters, spoken to social workers, even tried to reach out to his old military buddies. But the world had a way of closing its doors on him, no matter how hard he tried. The nights were the worst. As darkness fell and the cold crept in, Jack would wrap himself in his thin blanket, trying to block out the bitter chill. But it wasn't just the cold he was trying to escape. It was the loneliness, the silence that seemed to grow louder as the hours ticked by. He would close his eyes and try to sleep, but sleep didn't come easily. Thoughts of what could have been, of the life he once had, kept him awake. He would lie there, staring at the sky above, wishing for a sign, something to tell him that he wasn't completely lost. But every morning he would wake up, and the cycle would begin again. The hope that he had once held so tightly seemed to slip further and further away with each passing day. Jack started to wonder if he would ever escape this life, or if he would be stuck here forever, a forgotten soldier in a world that had moved on without him. As Jack sat alone on the cold street corner, the memories from his past began to fill his mind. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the days when he had a purpose. It wasn't just a job to him. Being in the military had been his life. He had been part of something greater than himself, a team working together with one goal in mind: to protect and serve his country. Jack remembered the feeling of pride every time he put on his uniform, the sense of belonging and importance that came with it. Those days had seemed so full of promise, so full of meaning. His thoughts drifted to his family. He remembered his children's laughter, the way they would run to him when he returned home, eager to hear about his day. His daughter, Emma, would always ask him what it was like out there in the world. His son, Jake, would sit on his lap and talk about his school day, his eyes wide with excitement. Jack had been their hero. He had been strong, dependable, and loving. His family had been everything to him. They were his reason for everything. But now, all of that seemed so far away. The children he had once held in his arms had grown up without him. He had missed their birthdays, graduations, and the small moments that were so important. Jack wondered how they were doing. He couldn't remember the last time they had visited him. In fact, he didn't even know if they still lived in the same house. There had been no contact for so long, and it felt like a lifetime since he had last heard their voices. He remembered the letters he had written, hoping that they would reach them, hoping that somehow he would be able to reconnect with the family he had lost. But each letter had gone unanswered. The silence that followed had been deafening. Jack had tried not to let it affect him. But the truth was that it hurt more than anything else. Every day, he thought about his children, and every day, he wondered if they were better off without him. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, Jack's sense of hope began to fade. The man he had once been seemed to slip further away. He couldn't remember the last time he felt truly happy, or the last time he had a real conversation with someone who cared. The streets had become his world, and the isolation he felt was suffocating. He watched as people went about their lives, laughing, talking, and making memories. The world seemed to move on without him, and he felt more invisible with every passing day. Sometimes he would catch a glimpse of a family walking together, or a couple holding hands, and for a moment he would be filled with longing. He missed that feeling of connection, the warmth of being part of something. But no one ever stopped to talk to him. No one ever stopped to ask if he was okay. The world had forgotten about him. He had become a ghost, walking through life, unnoticed and unimportant. The memories of his past kept him company, but they also reminded him of everything he had lost. The man who once wore his uniform with pride, The father who held his children close, the husband who promised to always be there. None of them existed anymore. They had all faded into the past, leaving behind only a man who wasn't sure if he even knew who he was anymore. And with every passing day, it felt like that piece of him was slipping away too. One chilly afternoon, as Jack sat on the same street corner, wrapped in his worn-out coat and staring at the ground, something unusual happened. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jack felt a tap on his shoulder. At first, he thought it was just someone brushing past him in a hurry. But then, the tap came again, gentle but persistent. He turned slowly, not expecting much. But what he saw made him blink in surprise. A young woman stood in front of him, smiling at him kindly. Her eyes were warm, and she didn't look away or act like she was trying to hurry past. It felt different. She wasn't like the others who ignored him or looked at him with discomfort. She was just standing there, as if she had all the time in the world, waiting for him to respond. "Hi there," she said softly, her voice gentle and calm. "Are you okay?" Jack was taken aback. It had been so long since someone had spoken to him like this, not as if he were invisible or a problem to be avoided. He tried to respond, but found himself momentarily lost for words. His throat felt tight, and he had trouble finding his voice. He was used to the silence, to the loneliness. It was easier to blend into the background than to engage with anyone. But something about the woman's presence made him feel like he wasn't just another forgotten person on the street. For the first time in so long, someone was acknowledging his existence. She held out a small bag of food. "I brought this for you," she said. "I wasn't sure what you might like, but I hope it helps." Jack hesitated, unsure of how to react. Was this some kind of joke? Was she pitying him? But the more he looked at her, the more he realized that she wasn't just offering him a meal out of obligation. There was sincerity in her eyes, something Jack hadn't seen in a long time. She wasn't looking down at him or treating him like a burden. She was simply offering kindness. Tentatively, Jack took the bag. He didn't know what to say. Words felt like they were stuck in his chest, trapped by the years of disappointment and pain. But as he reached for the food, he felt something stir inside of him. It wasn't much, a small gesture, a kind smile. But it was enough to make him pause and think. Maybe, just maybe, there was still some good in the world. Maybe not everyone had forgotten about him. The woman sat down beside him on the pavement, her presence still calm and inviting. "What's your name?" she asked after a few moments, her tone soft but genuine. Jack found himself telling her his name. Jack, like he hadn't said in years. It felt strange to speak it out loud again, but it also felt right. She didn't judge him, didn't rush him. She simply listened, and for the first time in so long, Jack found himself speaking about his past, about the life he had once lived, and the family he had lost. It wasn't easy, and it didn't come out perfectly, but it was something he hadn't done in a long time. As they talked, Jack couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The woman's name was Sarah, and she explained that she was part of a group that helped veterans in need. They provided meals, medical care, and even emotional support to those who had been forgotten by the system. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Could it be true? Was there really a way out of this? For the first time in so long, Jack allowed himself to feel a small sense of possibility. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe his life wasn't over after all. As Sarah stood to leave, she told him she would be back the next day with more resources, more help. Jack watched her walk away, a feeling of disbelief and cautious optimism filling his chest. He hadn't expected anything to change today. But something had. Something small, but something important. He couldn't help but wonder if this could be the first step toward something better. And as the evening light began to fade, Jack sat a little straighter, his thoughts swirling with hope for the first time in a long while. The next day, Jack found himself waiting in the same spot, but this time with a strange feeling. It was as if the weight on his shoulders had lightened, even if just a little. His eyes scanned the street as people walked by, but he wasn't looking for a handout or someone to notice him. He was waiting for Sarah. He didn't know what exactly to expect, but the conversation they had shared the day before gave him something to hold on to. Hope. As the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the street, Jack finally saw her. She was walking toward him, the same kind smile on her face. It felt like a small miracle, like something out of a dream. He hadn't realized just how much he had been longing for human connection until he saw her again. She wasn't rushing or looking around nervously. She was calm, purposeful, and kind. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he wasn't invisible. Sarah stopped in front of him and sat down on the pavement, just as she had the day before. "I told you I'd be back," she said with a smile. She didn't seem at all surprised to see him waiting. It was as if she had known all along that he would be there, and somehow that made Jack feel like he mattered. "Thank you for yesterday," Jack said quietly, his voice still a little hoarse from not speaking much. He had been alone for so long that words didn't always come easily, but he felt the need to express his gratitude. "I wasn't expecting anyone to talk to me, to just care." Sarah nodded, her expression gentle. "It's my pleasure, Jack. I know things seem tough right now, but there are people who care, and I'm here to help however I can. I don't want you to feel alone in this." Jack looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. "I felt alone for a long time. I lost contact with my family a long time ago. They probably don't even remember me anymore." The words came out before he could stop them, and he regretted it immediately. It was hard to admit the pain that had been buried deep inside for so long. Sarah didn't interrupt. She simply listened, giving him space to talk. "It's okay to feel like that," she said softly. "But you're not alone. There are others who've been through the same struggles. And you know what? There's a whole group of people who would love to get to know you. People who understand what you've been through. People who want to see you get back on your feet." Jack looked at her, unsure of what to say. Could it be true? Could there really be a group of people who wanted to help him? The idea seemed foreign to him. He had been fighting this battle on his own for so long that the thought of relying on others felt strange. But there was something about Sarah's words that made him believe it could be possible. "I don't know where to start," Jack confessed. "I don't even know how to ask for help." "That's okay," Sarah reassured him. "You don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to have all the answers right away. I'll be here every step of the way. Let's take it one step at a time, all right?" Jack nodded slowly. For the first time in years, he felt like there might actually be a path forward. The uncertainty and fear still lingered, but for the first time, he wasn't facing it alone. Sarah explained that there was a veterans center nearby where Jack could receive medical care, food, and support. They offered everything from mental health services to assistance in finding housing and employment. It sounded almost too good to be true, but Sarah's confidence and kindness made him want to believe. She handed him a card with the center's contact information on it and told him to stop by whenever he was ready. "Take your time," she said gently. "There's no rush. Just know that you have options, and I'm here if you need me." As Sarah stood up to leave, Jack felt a mixture of emotions. There was still fear, still doubt, but there was something else too, something brighter. It was the beginning of a change, and even though he didn't know exactly how it would unfold, he was ready to try. He watched Sarah walk away, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a chance to start over. The next few days passed in a blur for Jack. He held onto the card Sarah had given him, running his fingers over the edges as he thought about what she had said. He wasn't sure if he was ready to walk into that veterans center yet. It felt like a huge step, one that he wasn't sure he could take. He had been living on the streets for so long that the thought of walking into a place that might offer him help felt almost surreal. Could he really trust them? Could he trust himself to take that first step? But as the days wore on, Jack began to feel something new, a small but persistent flicker of hope. The idea of getting help didn't seem so impossible anymore. He started thinking back to what Sarah had told him about the Veterans Center. They weren't just offering food or shelter. They were offering a chance to rebuild his life, to reconnect with others who had been through similar struggles. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that maybe, just maybe, he deserved a chance to try. One morning, after sitting with his thoughts for hours, Jack finally decided it was time. He stood up slowly, his legs still stiff from sitting in the same position for too long. The card Sarah had given him felt heavy in his hand, but in a good way, as if it were guiding him. He tucked it into his pocket and set off in the direction of the Veterans Center. Walking through the streets, Jack was surprised by how many people he passed. He had spent so many months feeling invisible that he hadn't noticed how alive the world still was around him. People laughed, talked, and moved about their daily lives, completely unaware of the man who had once felt like a shadow. As he walked, Jack's mind raced. He felt nervous, unsure of what he was about to face, but also strangely determined. He had nothing left to lose. If this was his chance, he was going to take it. When he arrived at the Veterans Center, he stood outside for a moment, staring at the building. It didn't look like much, but there was a sign on the door that read, "Helping those who served." The words seemed to call out to him, and after a deep breath, he stepped inside. The door opened with a soft creak, and Jack was immediately greeted by a warm, welcoming atmosphere. The air was filled with the scent of coffee and fresh bread, and there were people talking quietly in the corner. It felt different from the streets, different from the cold, harsh reality he had become used to. Here, people seemed to care about one another. It was a small, simple thing, but to Jack, it felt like a lifeline. A woman behind the front desk looked up as he entered. She smiled at him, her eyes kind but with a hint of curiosity. "How can I help you?" she asked in a gentle voice. Jack took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the card. "I was given this by someone named Sarah. She said you could help veterans like me." The woman's smile widened. "Of course, come right in. Sarah has been a huge help to many of our veterans. Let's get you started." Jack followed her into a small office, where they began filling out paperwork and discussing the services the center offered. It was overwhelming at first: medical care, mental health support, food, job training, and even housing assistance. The more they talked, the more Jack realized how much help was available to him, how many people cared enough to make sure he had the chance to rebuild. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he wasn't alone. The weight he had carried for so long began to feel a little lighter, and though he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, he was ready to take it. The thought of seeing Sarah again filled him with a quiet sense of gratitude. She had given him the push he needed to take this first step, and now he could see a future that wasn't just filled with pain and loneliness. The center felt like a new beginning, and for the first time in a long time, Jack allowed himself to believe in that possibility. As the day went on, he made plans to return for medical care and to sign up for some of the job training programs. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't giving up this time. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for Jack. The Veterans Center became a place of routine for him, a place where he no longer felt invisible. At first, he felt out of place, unsure of how to interact with the others, many of whom had their own stories of struggle and survival. But as time went on, Jack found comfort in the shared experiences, and something unexpected started to happen. He began to heal, both physically and emotionally. The medical team at the center worked tirelessly to help him regain his strength. They treated his aches and pains, carefully helping him manage the injuries that had plagued him for so long. Slowly, he started to feel more like the man he once was. The fatigue that had weighed him down for so long began to lift. For the first time in years, Jack woke up in the morning without the overwhelming sense of exhaustion that had been his constant companion. The therapy sessions were harder, but they were also necessary. Jack had avoided confronting his emotions for years, burying them deep inside. But now, in a place that felt safe, he found himself opening up. He started sharing the stories he had kept hidden for so long, his time in the military, the bond he had with his comrades, and the way it all fell apart when he came home. There were days when the memories hit him hard, when the guilt and regret seemed too much to bear. But the counselors at the center were kind and patient, never pushing him too hard, letting him take his time. As he started to work through his emotions, Jack felt a new sense of clarity. The loneliness that had once consumed him didn't disappear overnight, but it became easier to manage. He realized that the pain he had felt was not a reflection of his worth. It was a result of circumstances beyond his control. The fact that he had survived, that he had kept going despite everything, showed a strength he hadn't recognized in himself before. One of the most surprising aspects of his journey was the people he met at the center. It wasn't just the staff who helped him. It was the other veterans too. Some of them had been through far worse than he had, and their resilience was nothing short of inspiring. Jack began to forge new friendships with people who understood the struggles he had faced. They spoke a language that only those who had been in the same situation could understand. They supported each other, offering advice and sharing laughs that were so rare in the life Jack had lived before. The camaraderie he found was a lifeline. It reminded him of the bonds he had once shared with his military brothers and sisters, the feeling of being part of something larger than himself. The center became a place where Jack didn't just receive help. It was a place where he could help others too. He began volunteering his time, lending a hand to newcomers who were just starting their own journeys toward recovery. In doing so, he found a new purpose, a new way to contribute, and it gave him a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't realized he was missing. One day, Sarah visited the center to check on him. Jack had been working with a group of other veterans on a small project, and when he saw her, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had been the one to reach out to him when he had given up. And now, thanks to her, he was building a new life. He told her about the progress he had made, and her face lit up with pride. "See," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I knew you could do it." Jack smiled, a feeling of warmth spreading through him. He wasn't the same man who had sat on that street corner, broken and lost. He was stronger, more confident, and more hopeful about the future. And though the road ahead still had its challenges, Jack knew he wasn't walking it alone anymore. He had found a community, a sense of purpose, and most importantly, a renewed belief in himself. The man who had once felt invisible was now seen, not just by others, but by himself. And that was the first step toward a new life. Months had passed since Jack first walked through the doors of the Veteran Center, and in that time, he had transformed in ways he never thought possible. He had learned to lean on the people around him, to trust again, and to take the steps necessary to rebuild his life. The man who had once felt abandoned, forgotten by both his country and his family, now had a sense of purpose. He was no longer just a shadow walking through life. He was Jack again, a man with a future, with goals, and with people who cared about him. One morning, as Jack walked down the familiar hallways of the center, he felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. The work he had been doing with the other veterans was starting to pay off. They had built relationships, shared experiences, and worked together on projects that not only helped them heal, but also helped others. Jack was no longer a passive recipient of help. He was an active participant, offering his time and support to those who were just beginning their journey. He had started taking on small jobs around the center, helping with organizing events, giving advice to newcomers, and even sharing his story when asked. It wasn't always easy to relive the past, but Jack found strength in doing so. His story wasn't just about hardship. It was about survival, about the strength to keep going when everything seemed lost. And when he shared his experiences, he saw the impact it had on others. They would listen intently, nodding in understanding, and sometimes even sharing their own stories in return. There was something incredibly powerful in knowing that his words, his struggles, and his progress could inspire someone else to keep fighting. But it wasn't just the work that brought Jack joy. It was the small moments, too. The smiles from fellow veterans when they saw how far he had come, the laughter during group sessions, and the sense of community that had blossomed within the center. Jack had come to realize that the connections he had made here were just as important as the healing process itself. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, and he was living with purpose. One day, as Jack sat in the common area, he saw Sarah walking through the door. She had been there for him from the very beginning. And now, watching him interact with the others, she looked at him with pride. She had been the one to offer him a way out, the one to remind him that he was worth helping. And now, as she watched Jack thrive, she knew that her efforts had been worth it. "Jack," she called softly, walking over to him. "I'm so proud of you. Look at everything you've accomplished." Jack smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah. You were the one who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Sarah's eyes softened. "You always had it in you, Jack. I just gave you the push you needed." As they sat together, talking about the progress Jack had made and the goals he still wanted to achieve, Jack realized how much he had changed. The pain, the loneliness, and the sense of being lost had been replaced with hope, connection, and the possibility of a better future. He wasn't the man he had been on that street corner anymore. He was stronger, more resilient, and most importantly, he knew his worth. As he looked around the center, surrounded by people who had become his friends, he knew that he wasn't alone. There was a community here, a family of people who had walked through similar struggles and had come out the other side stronger. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he was home. The future was still uncertain, and there would be challenges ahead, but Jack was no longer afraid. He had learned that with the right support, determination, and a little bit of faith, anything was possible. And as he stepped into the next chapter of his life, he knew that he was ready for whatever came his way.